We didn't talk a lot on a regular brother-to-sister level. The time we spent together, I had to become incredibly patient, and I learned a big lesson about that. When you're walking down the street downtown and your brother's screaming at the top of his lungs or he's moving his arms around every now and then, not all the time, but you just never know, and you know he's going to do it. You kind of almost have to get to a point where you don't care what other people think, and that it's more important to spend time with this person who's incredibly lost.
This is a jacket belonged to Aaron when he was little, and it has his name in it still, Aaron Miller, so he wouldn't lose it. Aaron was really good at losing things. And I'll always keep this little jacket. The sad part for a family that goes through this is that we remember the little boy and the proud child and the healthy young man he was. So we see a potential in every little child to have, now I see a potential in every child to be this ill. How are we to know that this little child that we had would eventually take his mother's life and have to live with that burden?
People think I was spacing out, but I was really like listening to the voices, right? I went to a party once and I thought that the mirror stole my soul, so I punched it out.
This is the three children when they were really little. I don't know the years they would have been, and the photographer took them. This is Christine, the oldest child. This is Aaron in the middle, and this is Peter, the youngest.
This is my mom and Aaron in '87, and the title actually that she had given this photo is Holding the Sun.
How are we to know that this little child that we had would eventually take his mother's life?
This is an example of some of the photos I took of my mom not too long ago. I believe it was in '96. And just one of those days on the breakwater. This sort of day out was one of those spontaneous sort of days out that we took, and I had the camera on hand and took a bunch of photos of my mom. I almost find it kind of eerie today to look at this photo. It doesn't scare me, it's just eerie and sort of it's almost like she's saying goodbye.
Oh, she was a wonderful person, yeah. She'd administer my medication and I wouldn't take it. Just pretend to swallow it and throw it in the garbage.
I currently now do a lot of consulting in technology about the internet, and I think electronic mail has been a useful thing for Ruth and I. We could stay in contact, and she posted me all the time on Aaron.
When Aaron was having his downward relapse of schizophrenia, I would have given my life to trade shoes with him. I prayed to God to let me suffer instead of him, but God would not agree. He made me watch my son suffer like nothing I have ever experienced before. I couldn't help. Nothing I could do or say would change the trauma happening before my eyes. There was nothing I could do to control it. My heart was torn open and my mind was burning with pain. It was too much to hold, and I had to let it go. I had to surrender it all into God's hands, and that was Aaron's gift and lesson to me. Bless his spirit.
Growing up with Aaron was really wonderful. He's such a great brother. And Peter. The two of them were like twins. And they became my little dolls. Like I used to dress them up, or they used to play with me. Like they used to be part of my little plays and my little productions that I'd put on. I was the oldest, so all this stuff that you do with your little brother. And Aaron and his friends. Got Aaron in the blue cap and the white shorts there, and some of his other friends from school, high school, and throughout his life that he had known since grade 3 or 4. I mean, his friends go way back for him. And They're very sporty and athletic group of guys and like doing this sort of thing.
Actually, in Buddhist mythology, Ruth was a Buddhist, the rhododendron is the flower of compassion, the flower of love, human kindness and compassion. I think I'm only going to cut one. Poor tree. There was a lot of pain. Ruth and my separation was never bitter, but it was very painful. We both loved each other. We didn't understand why we were separating. Hearts going in many different directions. And then watching her son fall apart. At the end of Ruth's life was just sheer, hot, burning pain.
In Victoria, there's the cliffs, right? I was going to drive off the cliffs in my friend's car, but I stopped to see this, the monk. And he lives right by the water, too. Well, I've known this monk since I've been a child, right? I always kind of liked him. And that was my cry for help right there. You know, I went over to his house, and, you know, I told him that I couldn't handle living anymore. Since I was suicidal, they called the police, and I went to the EMI. Locked me in a cell for about 4 days with no contact, like in isolation. And they gave me some pills. And at that point I thought I'd been captured by the evil forces, right?
When he was released from hospital and he was still living with his friends, you know, the windows were covered with black garbage bags. A very dark room in the basement that he chose to live in. Also, his face had changed a lot, like overnight. It seemed like the Aaron I knew growing up and up until quite recent it was almost as if he had experienced something that was so massive. And as to what it really was at the time, I wasn't sure, but his face almost seemed to have acquired lines overnight, deep ridges of experience from whatever that's from, like he had really transformed. He was a different person. So Aaron was the prime focus, even though my father's career was moving into the United States and things were just sort of breaking up and the family was off doing their own thing, and now there was this new angle to the family, and that was Aaron's illness. And it was something that actually we began to pull together on another level. It wasn't so much as the traditional family that it had been, but more for Aaron's sake and as to what we could solve or what we could find out about the disease or what Aaron was possibly going through.
The doctor told him he has a psychosis. I told Aaron gently that his disease is a disease of the brain and that it has nothing to do with him as a person. I told him it is nice that we can talk about it a little bit as it gives me more understanding. These moments are precious. They may never come again. So I was happy yesterday. We accept Aaron, illness or no illness, and have no intention to change him, just to love him and do what is best.
At the time, I felt as if I was living in just before the Nazis, you know, took over. Like, I thought everything was really repressed, and, you know, people couldn't speak their mind, or they, you know, felt, you know, really kind of primitive or gloomy.
It was hard to say what was really going through his head, why he felt guilt, but there was guilt and sadness for everything around him. And it's almost as if he could see people walking by as if they were bleeding or something, almost in a sense that bleeding pain, more in a figure of speech. He could see that pain seeping from people.
Aaron is slipping away. The way it is looking is that he may always need care. I could could never abandon him, knowing that he could end up on the street, as so many with mental illness do. Usually late night, Aaron would have so much energy, it would be really disruptive to the rest of the home and the household. Things like the vents were full of odds and ends in the house, like cloth or whatever Aaron could grab at the time, and very elaborate ways of stuffing things, like he'd have a kitchen vent stuffed up, then with like, I don't know, very odd things like stacks of pots. So things had to be locked up and hidden from Erin, especially her room, because he kept going in there to take things or just throw clothes off the racks and throw them on the floor. Aaron's auditory hallucinations are increasing. He talks to himself a lot now. He is obviously aware of his condition. A few nights ago I heard him say, "I hear all these voices in my head, but I don't know where they come from. The filtering system is not working so well." I often wonder if I have to look after Aaron for the rest of his and my life. Ramsey, Aaron is becoming more and more paranoid. He really believes that bombs will be exploding. The CIA, FBI is looking for him. Aliens are coming, or the internet is doing weird stuff. He phoned the police last week to report a BC Tel conspiracy. He has been staying up all night, up to 30 hours, running in and out of the house, in great and frantic haste, taking out boxes and suitcases of stuff and stashing them somewhere. He is isolated from human experience. There is no cure. Our Aaron is gone.
He'd go for 30 hours without sleep and then collapse, and that was happening for 9 months solid, and just burn himself out and then collapse, and get up and burn himself out and collapse, and it's going over and over and over and over.
I would really like to have some reliable professional help for him, and me for that matter. It's just too disconnected, insular and lonely trying to assume what is happening and how to deal with it. Be assured, I am in contact with the support group for relatives of schizophrenics. I did this a year ago, and am in contact with them again.
They'd come to me. It was like they expected me to free them from their aggressors. I thought they were from Europe, and they were communicating with telepathy, because they all had different accents, and I'd speak what they were saying, so I was being used as kind of like a microphone. You always feel you're under attack. You know, that becomes your reality.
At 2 o'clock in the morning, Aaron's running in and out of the house, and he's just in and out, not locking the door behind him, and you can just feel the energy is starting to pick up. And he's, puts his hands on me and says, "Christine, do you know what to do if the bomb goes off?" He says, "You get out." And I said, "Yeah, Aaron, whatever." And I was kind of laughing because, you don't know what to make of this. And he's like looking at me very sternly and saying, "No, don't laugh. You know what I mean." So he had a huge, whatever that was, whatever that fear was inside of him, he had a huge sense of protection, like he wanted to protect my mother and I. And he told us, "Well, there's a manhole out on the street, and you lift the lid up, and you go in there and you hide until it's all over." I went out through the back way and followed him, and almost in a single bound, and the guy was quite thin at the time, my brother Aaron, and he just boomed right up onto the satellite dish, which was like, I don't know, it seemed about 5 feet up, and he was just up there stuffing tinfoil into the center of the satellite dish. And he saw me watching him, and I said, "Aaron, get down from there." And he's like, he jumps down from the satellite dish onto the grass, and I'm looking at him, "Aaron, please talk to me, tell me what's happening." And he grabs me by the arm and says, "Christine, this is a serious matter," something to that effect. And I just was like, oh boy, I didn't know what to make of it. And his fear, it's funny how contagious fear can be, because when he was becoming fearful, I found myself in a moment there, in a place where I was really scared and believing it. During the trial, let's get there, Aaron's sentenced with the option. He's also given the option during the sentence, well, you've broke the law and you're clearly suffering from schizophrenia. These are the words of the judge. You are definitely a young man that's very sick and in need of help. And it's not acceptable for you to be running around the city dressed in these sort of army fatigues. And so the judge, when he was saying these things, we really believed, oh my God, finally somebody's said in front of, like in a court of law, in front of everybody, this person is clearly suffering from schizophrenia. Before that period of time, we had no other person able to give us a diagnosis.
Had I been here, I was in Indonesia working when Aaron was in the courts with the cutting of the cables. And that week my father died, Aaron was in the courts, and Ruth phoned me. She said she was ecstatic because now she could take care of him, and he'd have to take his pills. But she said that had to be the worst solution, but at least it was better than him being out in the street or in jail.
It's hard to tell what state he's in from a photograph. It's hard to judge this face. At least it is for me. Like, I find that I can become objective at times and look at him like who is this man? And I know he's my brother. But is he suffering? I mean, can you tell that? If he was walking down the street, would you be able to know these things? And I think that's sort of what the face of schizophrenia is.
Sorry.
It's okay. Just start again.
Okay. Ramsey, I am very depressed these days. Christine and Peter are moving out. I still wake in the night in tears when I think of what has happened to us and now Aaron. Aaron goes to trial April 3rd. Every day this week I take him to some obligation. Probation officer, psychiatrist, doctor, lawyer. I now understand what trauma is and the effect it has. People who are traumatized want to stay far away from the source of the trauma. It happens subconsciously, if not consciously. Anyhow, I don't think I am making any sense. I am so depressed. This is not the life I want. Forgive me. This is all so much emptiness. Ruth.
Aaron had been caught for keying cars and slashing tires or whatnot. And as to why he was released back into my mother's care after breaking the law is a real mystery. I believe that the terms were that if you broke your bail, you're back in jail. That's basically how it works, and or there's a fine to be paid. And none of that played a part that day on May 3rd. With that incident, the cops had released him back into my mother's care.
I really wish to create some dignity for myself in dealing with this sad and probably irreversible situation. I see so many single mothers in the same situation who get no help from anyone, struggling not only with the horrendous psychological dilemma, but also the financial crisis. I would like to ensure that this does not happen to this family. Every day I lock my bedroom door. Aaron himself reminded me that I must remember to do this.
She created a calendar, and she basically got all these hearts. So you can see that when Aaron started taking his pills in March, when he was first released from hospital on the 21st of March, that was the first medication that Aaron took. And it went through March, April, and then May. Now, Ruth had a habit of giving Aaron his meds at supper time, and Ruth had explained to me a number of times that she felt Aaron was growing more and more resentful about the meds. And Aaron would appeal to me occasionally and say, the medications I'm getting are poison. They're not good. They were banned. They were used in Vietnam to kill people.
I had one message from her on the Thursday, I think it was the Thursday or the Wednesday before. And she sounded sort of, now that I look back on the message, she sounded very lost, or she sounded like, let's not say lost, broken down, sad, or like there was a lot of weight on her shoulders.
So you can see here the 29th was Thursday night. I tried speaking to Aaron. That's the first night he would not speak to me on the phone anymore.
This is a tougher one because it was her last, so it's kind of emotionally hard for me.
Okay.
So I apologize. Hi. It will be good for you to spend some time with Aaron. It is the only way to really get a pulse on what this is. He's looking quite psychotic these days. He causes no harm, he just lives in his own world. Like many people, but much more fixated. I cannot hug him or be affectionate to him like before, as he does not like close contact. So unlike the warm and loving little Aaron that we knew. I do not begrudge him at all. Just because he cannot manifest or reciprocate certain feelings does not mean they are not there. One develops an even deeper empathy for the inner life. That is where he resides most of the time. I don't know, it's all a mystery, and I'm quite empty about it, but I know God is nurturing and taking care of me in ways that fill me with love and appreciation. As the song goes, all my trials, Lord, soon will be over. My soul is feeling deeply happy and content now, and I know I will only attract goodness in my life. Ruth.
He didn't get his med that night, and he'd finished eating dinner, and I think the meds are right after dinner. And of course you can see there's no heart here, and that's the night. Ruth died at dinner on May 30th. She had her back here as she was washing dishes. No, Ruth's friend Norman, Miss Norman was standing next to her washing the dishes in here, and Ruth would be drying, and she'd be reaching up and putting them in here. And as she reached up to put it in, her son, in a fit of stated delusion, my son, came in with a sword, a large sword, and in an absolute instant, the sword went up and into her heart and pierced both ventricles of her heart.
So, I remember they say, well, sit down, very, very attentive, 2 female police. They took the time out and said, take a deep breath, and they were very good about these things. They just sort of basically said, well, you know, your brother, Aaron, they were having dinner and there was a friend over, and Aaron unfortunately stabbed your mother. And when I heard that, my whole world fell apart. Like, I remember like saying no really loud and just crying out and going, I can't believe this. But there is a lot of grief and there is a lot of sadness, and the boy couldn't even attend his own mother's funeral. I mean, not that it would be comfortable for him because of the circumstances, but there's so much unnaturalness to this whole incident. Mom was very youthful, and it's hard to even imagine that she's gone because she was so vibrant. And Aaron was always so sweet, and there was really always a connection between the two of them. He always really looked out for her.
I was here Monday morning, and I saw Aaron Monday night. And by then he'd been incarcerated into Wilkinson jail, no medications, no professionals to look at him, no one, just there. And I have never seen Aaron in a state like that in my life before, and I don't believe he was in that state before Ruth's death either. I think the event snapped something pretty big in him. And I used my eyes to basically tune into him, and I grasped him because I wanted to reach into him, and I had to reach into him. I had this thing I had to tell him, and what I told him was, and I just opened up a lot of love in my eyes, and something just came through me, and I said, look in my eyes. Do you see the love in my eyes? And I said that for about 2 minutes. I said, look into my eyes, relax. Do you see the love that's in these eyes for you? And he actually, all at once, his eyes started changing a little, and he said, it's like a little child, because I reached him at the child level where he was a child. And he says, yeah. He came right out. He came out of this state for a moment. And I said to him, well, that's the love and forgiveness that I have for you and that your mother has for you. I just said that. Whereupon as he said, oh, she's alive? She's still alive? He really didn't really know. Somebody told him, but he didn't know whether she just got nicked. I mean, he really didn't even know how far the sword went. He didn't have a clue how he got in there. And I then had the unfortunate moment, which I didn't realize at the split second, I guess I should have, that I was telling him for the first time to his heart that his mother was dead. And I said, no, I'm sorry, she's gone somewhere else. And he just fell. He just fell and fell and fell.
I went through one period of time where I was really angry. Like, how dare he? And then, but always with the counter half of it going, he can't help it. Or look what he's got to live with now. Look at the guilt and the pain, and I can't even imagine what kind of dreams the kid's having, because my dreams are really interesting these days. And I was thinking, what about him? So there was a lot of compassion. It forced me to really realize what is the true meaning of compassion.
When the doctors saw Aaron at Forensic Psychiatric Institute in Vancouver, they said that he was one of the sickest patients they've ever admitted in that year. And this is for the criminally insane. This hospital is for the worst of the criminally insane in the province of British Columbia. And they instantly recognized this. Well, so it sort of makes you wonder, here was a mother caring for a potential person that was going to be in the FPI for the criminally insane, had no idea of this. The psychiatrists all had interviewed Aaron for half an hour every week or so. Everybody thought it was just fine. He was fine. There's no problem. He's taking his medication. And how is Ruth supposed to know he is or isn't? We found out that there was about a month worth of pills in his room that he'd hidden and spit out. The psychiatrists at the hospital where he's now being treated really well, they have interviewed Aaron after it happened, when he got back to normal after 4 weeks of drug treatment. They were able to stabilize his brain. But apparently he was told by a group of intelligence in Princeton University that if he didn't take his mother's life, and that of a black man, the whole city of Victoria would be annihilated. And he was already under the firm belief that he'd been recruited sometime before by the CIA and or the RCMP, and he'd finally been accepted and they all want him. So after his mother's death, he handed me a letter in hospital 4 weeks later, wherein he still thought he was in his right mind. And he was basically saying, Dad, I want you to give this letter to the authorities to get my pardon because of what I did to my mother, because I was acting under orders. He's been very, very hard on himself. He unforgivingly hard on himself because he does not, first of all, understand why he killed his mother, how it happened. The only parallels he draws are that, look, I didn't take my pills and because of it I'm a bad boy and my mother died. I don't think I've ever felt so much anger in one human being or seen that much anger in one human being in my whole life. I had to direct that anger, and luckily I was able to. I was very fortunate to be able to have directed that anger in a positive way, and that positive way is to make sure that Ruth didn't die in vain, and we're going to do it. This is a disease that has no advocacy. The people that suffer from it are usually broken and in hospitals. All you're left with is tattered and broken families to either jump up and start going at the system or just laying back and trying to heal. So we called for a full inquest. We got it. Boy, were we happy. I mean, the system works. Hey, it all at once starts to work.
Today is the day Ramsey Miller has been waiting for 10 months. This afternoon, Aaron's father, Ramsey Miller, took the stand. He says the family was shocked in November 1995 when Aaron was admitted to Royal Jubilee Hospital. He had been having suicidal thoughts. He was kept locked up in a small, dark, padded room for 3 days. He was never able to see a psychiatrist. That was the family's first jolt to their faith in the system. The inquiry has heard that 2 doctors recommended that Aaron be sent to a psychiatric facility, either Eric Martin or the Forensic Psychiatric Institute in Coquitlam. The judge, however, decided to send Aaron back into his mother's care. Ruth Miller had mistakenly been told that it would be months and months before Aaron could get a bed at one of those facilities. However, the inquiry has heard that it would have only been a matter of days.
Schizophrenia is a disease of youth. 1 in 100 young people in British Columbia come down with this disease, most of them between the ages of 18 and 22. Something goes wrong with their brain chemistry, and as a society, we don't take very good care of them. Typically, when these people get sick, they bounce around between the health system and the justice system. Thousands of young schizophrenics wander our streets. Their families at a loss and the system not responding. By some latest estimates, there are around 30,000 family members that are impacted by the disease of schizophrenia in the province of British Columbia. The jury delivered 31 recommendations, and all of them met and exceeded the family and my expectations. We are very thankful and very pleased with the recommendations.
What we find overall in this whole episode is that because of the fragmented nature of services, the fragmented nature of information, misinformation, failing to understand policies and procedures that are there to assist, people fall through the cracks. So this is an effort in legal sense to get everybody on the same page.
This has been a cathartic healing that we never expected we would get out of it. We just wanted to know the truth. We wanted to know the details. We didn't want to see blame. We wanted to know what had happened. And in a very interesting way, I think we're both going to be assessing for some time. This works some magic on our healing. It was really, so for me, it's been closure for our family.
I think that the most important aspect of the many changes that were affected by Ruth Miller's death was the issue of sharing of information. And it's my view that the recommendations related to sharing of information with family members got a significant boost from the recommendations of the coroner's jury.
Well, the whole funny thing about, I don't know, the last 2 years up to now is that it does get easier. You know, I know that's for somebody who's probably just going through something that's really horrible at the time, they would never believe that. I would never have believed it 2 years ago. You know, Peter may never see his brother again, and I would totally respect that.
Yeah.
You You know, you got to let people be the way they are, and yet in some parts, like of the certain combinations of our family, we're closer. I would say you and me are closer.
Oh, absolutely.
And,
oh, yeah.
Peter and I are
And
closer.
Aaron and I are closer.
You gotta sing happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Aaron. Happy birthday to you. Yeah!
I like police myself a lot now, you know. I just don't want it to take over again. Just kind of keep a watch on, like, I don't mind what I think, it's just what I do. If these, you know, the voices come back and I start acting out what they dictate, I want to catch myself and, you know, tell the doctors.
We believed there was a Canadian mental health care system that would, medical and mental health care system would help us. And we made that assumption. I would warn every parent in Canada and British Columbia to never make that assumption, because that is not the healthy assumption. The healthy assumption is assume you are getting no help and go and educate yourself and go from there.
I don't accept Ramsey Miller's point of view on this matter. I don't think it's up to people to go out and educate themselves, to help themselves. We have a healthcare system that is responsibility of government. I think government takes that responsibility seriously, is accountable to the public for the way in which that responsibility is carried out. I think that the way that we've structured the mental health plan reflects in many ways the lessons that we've learned from the inquest into Mrs. Miller's death.
Most of these people are in a state of confusion and bewilderment and upset and fear themselves. So it's not really the case of us being scared of them sort of thing, or an us and them mentality even. It's just, it could be anybody really, and it's not something to be feared, but if we could take the time out to understand it a little bit more as a society and pull together, and that's what I hope that the recommendations will provide in the future for everyone that seems to be touched by this disease.
We have to educate people better about this disease. Education is the key. It's more important than money or compassion and education. We need lots of compassion for these people, and we need lots of education. We don't need fear. And to me, fear is the opposite of compassion.
I'm just really fortunate that I have my father and my friends. They stuck by me. I wasn't deserted. And schizophrenia is, it steals your life away. My doctor thinks I'm stabilized, taking my pills. Reality is like really nice, you know, you enjoy it.
Is the flower of compassion, the flower of love, human kindness and compassion. I think I'm only going to cut one. Poor tree. There was a lot of pain. Ruth and my separation was never bitter, but it was very painful. We both loved each other. We didn't understand why we were separating. Hearts going in many different directions. And then watching her son fall apart. The end of Ruth's life was just sheer, hot, burning pain.
In Victoria, there's the cliffs, right? I was going to drive off the cliffs in my friend's car. But I stopped to see this, the monk. And he lives right by the water, too. Well, I've known this monk since I've been a child, right? I always kind of liked him. And that was my cry for help right there. You know, I went over to his house. And, you know, I told him that I couldn't handle living anymore. Since I was suicidal, they called the police and I went to the EMI. Locked me in a cell for about 4 days with no contact.
Child and the healthy young man he was. So we see a potential in every little child to have, you know, now I see a potential in every child to be this ill. How are we to know that this little child that we had would eventually take his mother's life and have to live with that burden?
People think I was spacing out, but I was really like listening to the voices, right? I went to a party once and I thought that the mirror stole my soul, so I punched it out.
This is the three children when they were really little. I don't know the years they would have been, and the photographer took them. This is Christine, the oldest child. This is Aaron in the middle, and this is Peter, the youngest.
This is my mom and Aaron in '87. We didn't talk a lot on a regular brother to sister level. The time we spent together, I had to become incredibly patient, and I learned a big lesson about that. When you're walking down the street downtown and your brother's screaming at the top of his lungs or he's moving his arms around every now and then, not all the time, but you just never know, and you know he's going to do it. You kind of almost have to get to a point where you don't care what other people think, and that it's more important to spend time with this person who's incredibly lost.
This is a jacket belonged to Aaron when he was little, and it has his name in it still, Aaron Miller, so he wouldn't lose it. Aaron was really good at losing things. And I'll always keep this little jacket. The sad part for a family that goes through this is that we remember the little boy and the proud...
Ever experienced before. I couldn't help. Nothing I could do or say would change the trauma happening before my eyes. There was nothing I could do to control it. My heart was torn open and my mind was burning with pain. It was too much to hold, and I had to let it go. I had to surrender it all into God's hands, and that was Aaron's gift and lesson to me. Bless his spirit.
Growing up with Aaron was really wonderful. He's such a great brother. And Peter. The two of them were like twins. And they became my little dolls. Like, I used to dress them up, or they used to play with me. Like, they used to be part of my little plays and my little productions that I'd put on. I was the oldest, so, you know, all this stuff that you do with your little brother. And Aaron and his friends. I've got Aaron in the blue cap and the white shorts there, and some of his other friends from school, high school, and throughout his life that he had known since grade 3 or 4. I mean, his friends go way back for him. And they're a very sporty and athletic group of guys and like doing this sort of thing.
Actually, in Buddhist mythology, Ruth was a Buddhist, the rhododendron...
And the title actually that she had given this photo is Holding the Sun.
How are we to know that this little child that we had would eventually take his mother's life?
This is an example of some of the photos I took of my mom not too long ago. I believe it was in '96. And just one of those days on the breakwater. This sort of day out was one of those spontaneous sort of days out that we took, and I had the camera on hand and took a bunch of photos of my mom. I almost find it kind of eerie today to look at this photo. It doesn't scare me, it's just eerie and sort of it's almost like she's saying goodbye.
Oh, she was a wonderful person, yeah. She'd administer my medication and I wouldn't take it. Just pretend to swallow it and throw it in the garbage.
I currently now do a lot of consulting in technology about the internet, and I think electronic mail has been a useful thing for Ruth and I. We could stay in contact, and she posted me all the time on Aaron.
When Aaron was having his downward relapse of schizophrenia, I would have given my life to trade shoes with him. I prayed to God to let me suffer instead of him, but God would not agree. He made me watch my son suffer like nothing I have